Okay. Ready to, do you want to get going?
Rabbi?
Yeah, I can hear you. How are you doing?
Okay, I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, thank God. You're braving up to show your face today.
Oh, yeah. I got cleaned up before class today. I went out and worked this morning for 2 hours.
Always good to see you.
Thank you. You too.
All right.
Blessings.
Thank you. Thank you.
All
All
right.
right.
After your run through, I'm going to try to get some people on. So I got to go chase students down.
You're the classroom monitor.
Well, we got two of them in one spot. We got you. We got me. Perfect. Oh, I just wanted to let everyone know that for the females, there is a woman who is actually available for women specifically. If you have questions you want to directly ask a woman about if that makes you feel comfortable, I have someone for you all. Only for the family stuff. I don't want to go into that. Okay, sorry.
Good.
Just ask myself there. Good morning, Hannah. Good morning, Abichai.
All right. Good morning, everyone. Good afternoon.
Good morning.
Good afternoon, Rabbi. All right.
Good. All right, guys. If you're ready, we can kick off. Avichai, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
Good. Thanks for coming.
Good morning.
Good morning to you. All right, guys. So if you're all ready, we can start. Wow, you're looking super religious.
There you go, Abichai.
Dressed appropriately. All right. So today, we're gonna have a look at the 13 principles of faith. Now, the book I'm gonna use is basically this book here. I'm gonna leave some links on the video in the comments below, just with some resources that you can look at. But basically, so this is a translation, and it was written. Well, the 13 Principles of Faith was written by someone called the Rambam. Okay, and that's an acronym for Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon, right? Rabbi Moses, the son of Maimon. And just to give you a little bit of context of who Maimonides, as you see here, is referred to as Maimonides. So who was Maimonides? So Maimonides was he lived in the year, he was born in 1135, and Maimonides is actually, it's from the word, a Latin word. His Ides actually means son of, and he was the son of Maimon. His father's name was Maimon, and he was the son of Maimon, and he goes by the Latin term Maimonides, Moses, the son of Maimon. And we'll explain a little bit how he got that name and where that comes from. So the Rambam was kind of a very unique individual in the fact that he accomplished a huge amount. He only lived for 69 years, but in that brief lifetime, he accomplished a phenomenal amount. I'll tell you just to give you a bit of context of who he was and what he did. So he was born in Cordova in Spain in 1135, and during that time there was a persecution which took place where the Almohads chased a lot of Jews, persecuted Jews out of Spain in that time, and Maimonides then moved to Fez in Morocco, and he moved later on into Egypt, and then he moved back, and he lived briefly in Israel for a short amount of time. So just to give you a little bit of a glimpse of who Maimonides was, so he had 4 different professions. He was a philosopher, he was a physician, a doctor, he was also a Torah scholar, right, a rabbi, a dayan, and he was also involved in a lot of sciences. So he accomplished a great amount of things in a very short span of time. Now, just to give you a little bit of some of the background, what Maimonides tried to do is Maimonides' principal work was to try and condense the Torah knowledge to make it more applicable and understandable for the masses. So he went through huge volumes of learning, and he wrote in his native language, which was Arabic, and he tried to disseminate Torah knowledge to the masses. Now, that came with a price. A lot of people at the time were, quite disdained with that work because it allowed the masses to be informed. Now, during the time, literacy levels were very low, and Maimonides made Torah knowledge very applicable to everybody. So that was his principal goal, of trying to make sure that the average man on the street knew as much Torah knowledge as he could without having to be a huge scholar. Now, the 13 Principles of Faith was a work that Maimonides worked on, just to show you where it's found. So here is a Talmud, Bavli, Babylonian Talmud, and this is actually the 15th volume of that Talmud. And his work appears inside of the Talmud itself, just to give you a glimpse of what the original text looks like, or the modern day version of it. You can see it's pretty tiny writing, and this has been preserved for almost 1,000 years. So it's found, his actual work was found in a tractate called Sanhedrin, which deals with the judges and laws. And that's in there he wrote what was known as the Perish HaMishnayos, which is the commentary to the Mishnah. And over there he lists 13 principles of faith. And what he did in order to come up with that is he scanned the entire Jewish corpus of literature to find out, what do Jews believe in? What is a common theme that's universally accepted by everyone? And that was kind of a lot of what Maimonides' work was. He did what was called codifying, which basically meant at that stage, Jewish laws were not set down like we would understand them today. They were kind of scattered all over the place. You'll find laws of Shabbos in one section of the Talmud, and laws of brachas in another, and a lot of it is intertwined. You had to know a lot to be able to practice. What he did is he studied everything and kind of set it down into a code of law. And one of his most famous works, which he published in, I think it was 1168 or maybe 1180, he published a work called the Yad HaChazaka, which was Yad is the numerical value of Yad is Yud is 10, and a Daled is 4, it means 14, and it was a 14-volume work which encompasses all of Jewish law. It was a monumental task, almost like writing the entire encyclopedia. Now, Maimonides, that was just one of his works. He was famous for writing the Perish HaMishnayos on the Mishnah, the commentary on the Mishnah. He wrote the Yad HaChazaka, as we just said, and he wrote another book called Moreh Nevuchim, which is also quite well known for. Now, Moreh Nevuchim, they translated as the Guide to the Perplexed, which is a book entirely on philosophy. And Maimonides was also a principal philosopher, and he was well known in every one of his fields. Now, there's an interesting story with the Rambam, that the Rambam actually, he started off in his business. He believed that he was an 8th generation dayan, which dayan is a Jewish judge. And so his father was a Jewish judge, and for 8 generations beforehand were also, they came from quite a well-known and established family. And the Rambam was of Sephardic origin, and the custom amongst the Sephardic Jews was, and the Rambam believed this a lot, was that as a rabbi or a Jewish judge, one should have another profession. One shouldn't be paid to be a Jewish judge. He said it can cloud the mind. And so the Rambam was very much an independent thinker, and that also caused a lot of conflict with Ashkenazi counterparts. We'll discuss that a little bit in a moment, how that panned out. So the Rambam's business that he originally got involved in, he was a diamond merchant or a gem merchant, and he was in business with his brother. He's had a brother by the name of David. And there's an interesting story how that happened. There was, at the time when the Rambam escaped from where he was, there were a lot of Jews that were taken captive. And the Rambam went on a campaign, and he collected a huge amount of money, and he redeemed all the Jews that were imprisoned, and he managed to make some deal with the Tam and to free them. And with the remaining amount of money that he had, he gave his brother this money, and he told him to go towards Egypt and buy some diamonds and then bring them back to Morocco to sell them there. And his brother went to Egypt but found that the diamonds weren't of a good quality, and he decided to embark on a journey to go towards India. And while he was traveling towards India, the boat sunk, and his brother, the Rambam, lost his brother at that time. And the Rambam was actually inconsolable for a long time. He writes in one of his works that he was very, very depressed for about a year. He was completely, incapable, couldn't do anything. He was so down. He lost his brother, and with that, he also lost his family fortune. So the Rambam had to kind of start again from scratch at that age. And he went into the profession of being a doctor. And he was very, very successful at being a doctor. And that's probably one of the things that he's well known for, is the Rambam was known to be an expert physician. At the age of about 45, he was appointed the physician to the Viceroy, and then later on to the Sultan Saladin. And he wrote many medical works that are still in use till today, and they actually archived. So the Rambam was known as an independent thinker, not just in the Jewish world, but he made a huge name for himself in the scientific world. And that's how the Rambam there was a statement saying that there was Mimoshe ad Moshe ein k'Moshe, which they translate to Hebrew. In English, it translated from Moses until Moses, there was no one like Moses, which meant that from Moses, the one who received the tablets, now Moses from the Bible, until Moses, meaning Moses, Maimonides, there's been no one as great as Moses in between. So he really had a very, very great reputation. His knowledge was phenomenal, and just to give you a breakdown of his day, where he even found the time to study. So he stayed in a place called Fostas, and he was a principal doctor for the king, and he treated the king. He would travel by hour, journey every day to work. He would spend the day, with the king, treating all the royal family, and he would see a number of patients throughout the day. When he got back, he would have people waiting to see him as a doctor in his hometown of Fastad, which he would do for the most of the evening, and only late at night would he actually work on his Torah study and his Torah writing. Now, in that short amount of time, it's almost inconceivable how he did it. He wrote what you could say maybe 3 encyclopedias worth of Torah knowledge. So just a huge genius of a man. And apart from that, I think he had authored in every field about 100 works. So it's almost incomprehensible how one human being can have accomplished so much. So that's just to give you a basis of who Maimonides was. So he was what they call a Risha, and he lived in that period. Now Maimonides went into explaining what are the principles of faith. What do Jews believe in? And so the first one, we'll start off, and we'll just go in order just to understand and what the principles are. So if you have the book, you can find it in a siddur, but I'll read to you briefly what it is in Hebrew, and I'll translate it into English. Right, you'll find it in a siddur, yes. Okay, so I'll read it to you in Hebrew, and it's important to know that whenever we think of God, and we think of Hashem, it's more than just, this is kind of the understanding who Hashem really is. It's more than, it's actually having kind of a knowledge of what Hashem is. And this was the first one. So I'll read it to you in Hebrew, and I'll translate it for you. So they all begin with, Ani Mamin, I believe, Be'emunah Shelema, with complete faith, Shehabayra Yisbarach Shemar, that the Creator, blessed is His name, Hu Bayre Umanig Lako Abrim, He created and controls all that which was created, V'hu Levado, and He alone, Asa, He does, V'oise, He's doing currently, V'yase, and He will do, L'cho Hamaisim, everything which exists. Okay, so the first principle is essentially saying that God sustains creation. God was the one who made everything and continues to have all that which exists. Now, just to understand in context what that means, the creation itself, as we see around us, it's not, as you might assume, that God created the world and then can kind of, the creation can exist without God's presence. So I want to explain to you how creation was made, and just want to show you, just to keep it in context. So over here, if you want, I'll also share this link with you. If you can see that. Okay, so over here, this is from this the other book, In Search of the Creator, where if you want a copy as well, I'll send you one. Where this is basically what you call this the spiritual map. Okay, now when God created the world, there's something called hishtalshelus in Hebrew, which is flow, and flow is the way that God created the world, right? By flowing down. There's 4 dimensions which exist in the world. The first dimension is a world in which only God exists. And in that dimension, that's called the Olam HaAtzilus, the world of only God. And in that dimension, the only thing which is visible, which can be experienced, is God alone. So God kind of lives in that dimension of called the world of Atzilus. Below that, taking it one level closer to our reality, is called the Olam HaBria, the world of creation. And then that flows into it the world of Yetzirah, which is formation, which eventually leads to our world that we see in front of us, which is called the Olam HaAsiyah, the world of doing. Now, essentially, the way it works is God's energy flows down from creation, almost like a waterfall, where it begins at the top, where the source of it is, and the energy of God flows through these various dimensions and energizes everything which exists. So, when you take the creation, for example, when God created the world, He didn't just make it and it can exist without being there. God's inner energy is continuously flowing into everything which exists in order for it to be alive and for it to maintain itself. So God is the best way to understand, almost like electricity flowing through in a circuit. God is powering up or supplying energy to everything which exists. So if God wasn't supplying the energy, if God had to withdraw or take away from Himself, from the creation, everything which we know would just cease to exist. Okay, so that's the first principle, of universal principle of Jewish faith, is that God didn't just create, but He's in a process of currently creating. Now, and the sages say that every moment, we say in our prayers, Hamachadesh betuvoy b'chol yom tamid ma'aseh bereshis in Hebrew, and in English it says Hamachadesh. Yeah, God renews b'chol yom, every day, ma'aseh bereshis, the work of creation, which means that every single second we are constantly being renewed. We don't feel it or experience necessarily, but every single second it's a brand new creation. Every single second, God's continuously flowing down and giving this energy. So whereas a human being who makes something, you could, for example, build a chair, make a table, and or build a house, let's say, and the person who built it can die, and the house will stand and remain independent of the one who created it. Now, God didn't create the world in that way. God's creation is dependent on God. So that is the first principle of faith. I would say that I believe that God is the creator. What we're saying is not God didn't just make it, but He's continuously sustaining the creation as it goes along. Okay. And obviously, I'm sure you'll have questions. I'll take them soon. I just want to go through the second and the third, and then I'll take some questions in a second. Now, the second one of the second principle of faith, again, I'll read it to you in Hebrew, is Ani Mamin, I believe, Be'emunah Shalem, with complete faith, Shahaboira Yisbarach Shmo, that the Creator, blessed is His name, Hu Yachid, He's individual, Ve'ein Yachidus Kamohu, and there's no individuality like Him, V'shum Panim in any way, V'hu Levada, and He alone, Elokeinu is our God, Hoya He was, Hoive He is, V'yiyeh, and He will be. Now, in that principle of faith, there are two statements which are saying, and the first one is the unity of God, that God is one. Now, it is important to remember that, especially in the times of the Rambam, there was a very interesting question which was asked, and there was a lot of Muslim influence, and the Rambam actually wanted to find some common ground to say, what do we believe? Do we believe in many deities? Where do Jews stand in this regard? And the Rambam was out to say that Jews believe that there's one God. So that's on a very simplistic level, that we as Jews will believe that there's one God. The next element of it is that there is no pieces to God. God is one unit. Now, what that means is that there's just to give you a little bit of an explanation, if you would take anything around you that you could see, take a piece of paper, for example, you could cut that paper in half. You now have two pieces of paper. So you've taken one thing, but you've divided it. Now, if you take that half, you can cut it again, you'll have 2 quarters. And you can cut those 2 quarters and have 8ths, and cut it again and have 16ths, and so on and so on and so on. Eventually, you're going to get down to the level where you're dealing with molecules. And if you divide a molecule, you're going to get down into atoms. And if you get down into atoms, you can split that as well. You can have you'll have the parts of the atom. You're going to have your protons, your neutrons, your electrons. And if you split that yet again, you're going to have quarks. So for example, you have a proton. It's got 2 upward quarks and 1 downward quark. So, and again, it can be split and split and split. Where that ends, we don't know. Right? That's where, for example, string theory comes along. To know what is the smallest part of matter. Now, just to give you context of what that means, on the tip of a needle, there's enough room to fit 100 million atoms. Now, and the most of the world that we see around us is actually empty space, is actually energy. If we had to just condense everything which exists in the world into its finite matter, you could probably fit the whole world, the whole globe, into the size of a tennis ball. That's how much actual material exists in the world. The rest of it is actually just empty space. So, for example, if you think of an atom, the electron which spins around the nucleus, it would be kind of like a stadium, like a baseball stadium. Think of a ping pong ball flying around, the size of a stadium. That's how big electrons are. The most of it just empty space. So the actual matter of the world is entirely, it's almost non-existent. It's almost miraculous how reality is. So God, who made all of that, is not divisible. God made those things, but God himself is not divisible. Now, the best way I understand it with my own comprehension, and this is something that the Ramchal explains, and says that because we learn by a process of comparison, everything which we know, we have to compare it to something else. So, for example, if I talk about the color red, right, and the Rambam himself brings this as an example, why we struggle to understand God is because there is only one God, which is a problem for a human being to understand something. When there's no comparative way to understand it, we struggle. So he says that, for example, I can't tell a blind person, what the color red is because he's got no reference. So where there's only one, if there's no other God, there's no way for us to imagine it. So God, we often think of, or Hashem, we think of it, as maybe an old man with a white beard, that sort of thinking, right, is often where we get caught and think, how does God work? How does that happen? Who are we talking to? But in reality, God is probably something closer to what, like the essence of what Hashem really is more like something like electricity that's loving. You could maybe call it loving electricity. That's kind of how, in my mind, I understand what Hashem's real essence. We can't really comprehend the actual essence of what it is, but it's more like that than anything else. And that energy of what we call Hashem is the source of all that exists, and that's where that's the concept. And the last point on that was that God is above time. God is a created time and doesn't live within time. So, and if we think about time in itself, time is a construct. We think about the world turning. In essence, time is almost, we know that aging happens, when time passes, but the two can actually be very separate things. So for example, let's say we didn't age and the world was just turning around, we're actually not doing anything. Time doesn't really exist. What are we doing? We're just spinning. So it's no daylight, no sunrise, sunset, sunrise, sunset. But in reality, today and tomorrow, it's actually all the one long day. We've invented this way to keep track of ourselves and what date and time it is, based on when sunrise and sunset is. But in reality, time is a construct. We notice it because of its other processes. We notice aging and things like that. But the two could be very separate. Now, Hashem is completely above time. He doesn't exist within time. So that's one of of this fundamental, right? This over here is the second principle. I'll move on to the third, and then I'll take some questions. We'll stop there. The third principle is, I'll read it again in Hebrew, and that's how it says as follows. So, Ani ma'amin be'emunah shalema, I believe with complete faith, Shabari is Barak Shemoy, that the Creator, blessed is He, Eina Guf, He doesn't have a body, Velo yasigeu masige haguf, and He's not influenced by physical phenomena. Ve'ein lo shum dimyon klau, and there's nothing which compares to Him. Now, this concept over here is that God does not have a physical body. That God is not, as we would understand, a physical body. And the reason, when the Rambam wrote this, there were a lot of detractors who wrote out and spoke very harshly against the Rambam, because we often see that there's verses where it says the hand of God will do this, and God will get angry, and God is anthropomorphized in a lot of context. We speak of God as being almost like a person. Now, the Rambam explains that this is just for explanation and for us to understand it, but God really doesn't have a body, right? God does not have a body. Now, the way that I used to understand this is that since God is infinite, right, the concept of body is almost like a container. And if you have something which is infinite, infinity cannot be contained. The minute a container is always bigger than that which is inside of it. So if you have to think of think of a box, right? If you have to, the box has to be bigger than the thing which is inside of it. Now, if God is infinite, by definition, you cannot have something larger than infinity, because that thing would then be bigger than infinity. So because God is infinite, so by default, God cannot be contained within any body. So just it would be illogical for God to have a body. So that was the first part. And the second part is that God is not influenced by any physical phenomena, which means that the events which happen on a physical level do not affect God in any way. God remains completely independent and separated from all physical. So God acts on the physical, but is not affected by the physical. So where, for example, you or me, we can feel, physical, we can feel hot, we can feel cold, right? If it's really cold outside, it doesn't affect, God's mood, or God is completely removed from all physical phenomena. He doesn't experience that the way that we do, and that's also part of not having a body. So yeah. So basically, those are. We'll go through them more, and if there's any questions that you have, so you can let me know. All right, you want to unmute yourself, guys? If you have questions, I'm happy to go through. No questions? Okay, so Ashton has a question here. Does the 13 principle of faith expose the flaws of Amalek? Um, in a way, yes. Okay, so what the 13 principles of faith are is basically Amalek was the nation which they described in the Torah as by the words of where we meet them, and they were Asher Korcha Baderech, which is the verse of the Torah, which is that Amalek met the Jewish people with, and the Torah uses the word Korcha. Korcha means that they happened by chance. Now, Amalek doesn't believe in divine supervision or God's influence, and there was a philosophical debate which still goes around, where some people believe that there was a God who created the world, but then God kind of abandoned the creation and moved on to another project. Right. So that was like a competing ideology, where people would, let's say, believe that there was a God, but not that there is a God. That makes sense. Um, so our belief system is that we don't just believe that there was a God who made, created the world, but there is a God who's continuously, actively involved in day-to-day occurrences. So, and one of the signifying factors, that was kind of why we remember the exile and coming out of Egypt, was that we saw that God is actively involved on a day-to-day basis. He was doing things in the present, and was still involved with the creation even after it had been made. So, so that was kind of why it was such a signifying moment coming out of Egypt. It showed that God was actively involved in the present and didn't just abandon creation, for afterwards. Okay. Anyone else have a question? Hannah?
I do.
Yeah,
Yes.
sure.
Thank you. Thanks. That was very, very interesting. I really enjoyed the history around the Rambam and text. Thanks for that.
Yes, okay.
One question I have is, you said that before he put these together, there wasn't really, everything was all over the place. So can I deduce from that then the Jewish faith was experienced differently before? And if not, what's really the role of these 13 principles of faith? Is this like a yardstick of how you know what you
Right,
believe, or what's
right.
their role?
Great question. So what the Rambam did was, again, he was a codifier, and what that means is he liked to put things into a system. Jewish people believed all of what he had to say, and he found that these are taken for granted. The themes which we have discussed over here are themes which, if you look throughout Jewish literature, you would find that these are taken for granted. So Jewish people believed this, but it had never been systematized. It had never been categorized as we believe X, Y, and Z, and we believe, in each one of those principles. Now, the Rambam wanted to do that, first of all, to distinguish what made Judaism different from competing religions. Remember, at that period in time, there was a lot of contradictions and a lot of influences. There was a huge movement of Christianity fighting with, the movement of Islam, and then there's Judaism. And there was people wanted to know what makes a Jew different from a Muslim, from a Christian. What do we actually believe? So these beliefs had been there, but had never been systematized. And the Rambam wanted to kind of give this into a very categorized way. There were certain principles. For example, when the Rambam wrote his works, some of the principles were criticized. And in fact, the Rambam, after his death, I think it was in the year, I think it was 1232, already after the Rambam had died. So there was a group of Ashkenazic Jews in the south of France who took the Rambam's work and they went to what they called the Dominican friars, and they were the ones who were in control of France. And they said, we have this Jewish rabbi who's come up with a whole set of books. He's disrupting Jewish way of life. Can you do something about it? And they took action and they burnt all of the Rambam's works. And in fact, a lot of his manuscripts, which never got to be published, were burnt. They burnt a lot of the Rambam's works. So there was a divide, people that came. And about 100 years later, there was someone by the name of the Rashba who kind of made a compromise and a truce between, to try and mediate and settle, because they saw that it got out of hand. And that's when actually the song of Yigdal came around. And that's kind of when the Rambam was kind of accepted into, you could say, mainstream Judaism. So in his lifetime, he experienced a lot of uphill, and he wasn't necessarily given the credit. But later on was accepted that the Rambam's work is accurate and flawless and almost. So Judaism was practiced. It did evolve with time, but these ideas were taken for granted. So it didn't. I think the Rambam's job was to kind of make it more known. That answers your question.
Awesome. Anybody else have any other questions? Don't be shy. It's perfectly okay. You got the time right now. Okay, I guess that's it.
No question.
If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can probably message the rabbi or myself. We're here for each and every single one of you guys. Thank you, Rabbi, for your time today.
And guys,
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you for joining. And guys, just to let you know, if you ever have entering the week any questions or anything that's bothering you, I'm here for all of you in whatever capacity I can. So, so if there's anything I can help you with, I'm here for you. So, so reach out. Don't be shy.
A little bit. Go ahead and feel free.
Bye. Thank
Bye.
you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.